My daughter secretly annulled her marriage, but one prenup clause protected $3.8 million her husband thought he'd claim. I want to start with the wedding, because the wedding is where people will tell you the trouble began. They are wrong. The trouble began about 6 weeks before that, when Grant Whitfield started asking my daughter very specific questions about the income stream on a commercial building on West End Avenue. He framed it as interest. He told her he wanted to understand what he was becoming part of. Stephanie told me about it the way a person tells you good news. She thought it was a sign. She said, "Mom, he's taking it seriously. He wants to know how it all works." I remember nodding. I remember pouring her another cup of coffee. I also remember a small pressure behind my eyes that I did not name out loud. The building on West End was not a romantic question. It was a balance sheet question. And men who fall in love with women do not usually ask about the cap rate before they ask about the honeymoon. I called our family attorney that same afternoon. His name is Daniel Pruitt. He has been with our family for 26 years. He drafted my husband's will. He drafted the trust that holds the bulk of our property. He knows where every deed is filed, and he knows which papers were notarized on which afternoon. I told him I wanted a prenuptial agreement, and I told him I wanted a specific clause inside it. The clause was simple. If an annulment was filed within the first 90 days of the marriage, every piece of jointly titled property would revert to whoever owned it before the wedding. Title would snap back like a rubber band. No negotiation, no equitable division, no argument about what was intended. Just the document doing exactly what it said. Daniel asked me why 90 days. I told him because 90 days is enough time for a person to admit they made a mistake, and not enough time for them to pretend it was love. The wedding cost $1,200,000. I paid for all of it. The flowers came from a grower in Franklin. The string quartet came from Nashville. The dinner was served on rented china that had a small gold rim. I remember the rim because Stephanie touched the edge of her plate during the toast and looked up at me, and for 1 second, she looked exactly like she did when she was 7 and had broken something she did not want to admit to. I told myself I was imagining it. Grant gave a short speech. He thanked me by name. He called me the woman who made this whole life possible. I smiled the way mothers smile at weddings. I noticed that he did not look at Stephanie when he said it. The prenup had been signed 11 days earlier in Daniel's office. 2 witnesses, 1 notary. The notary's stamp left a small raised circle on the bottom of the last page. I ran my thumb over it before I left the office that day. It felt like a coin. It felt like something my husband would have approved of. That was the first scene where the ring mattered. Grant slid it onto Stephanie's finger at the altar, and I watched her hand the whole time, because I wanted to see if her fingers were steady. They were. Too steady, maybe, but steady. The honeymoon was in Charleston. They came back after 8 days. Stephanie called me from the car on the drive home and said the trip was fine. That word sat in my chest for a long time after she hung up. A wife who has just come back from her honeymoon does not call it fine. The first red flag came the following Sunday. We have a family lunch every Sunday at 1. We have had it since before my husband died. Stephanie did not come. She texted me at 12:45 and said she was figuring some things out and would catch up next week. I texted back and said, "Of course, take your time." I set the table for 4 instead of 5. Grant was supposed to come too. Neither of them came. The second Sunday, she did not come either. Same text, almost word for word. The third Sunday, I drove to her house. She opened the door and she had no ring on. She told me she had taken it off because she was cleaning. I looked past her into the kitchen, and there were no dishes in the sink, and there was no smell of soap on her hands. I did not say anything. I kissed her on the forehead the way I always do, and I drove home, and I sat in my driveway for a long time without turning off the car. That was when Daniel called. He said, "Margaret, I have not received the post-wedding property transfer paperwork from Stephanie's side. It was supposed to be filed 2 weeks ago. Do you know if her attorney sent it?" I said, "What do you mean her attorney? You are her attorney." There was a pause on his end. He said, "She retained someone privately about a month before the wedding. I assumed you knew." I did not know. That was the moment my stomach moved. Not my heart, my stomach. The body knows things before the mind catches up. I drove to Daniel's office the next morning. I sat in the same chair I had sat in for 26 years. He brought out a folder. He laid the prenup on the table between us. He laid my husband's old notarized instruction on top of it. He said, "Whatever is happening, this is still the document. This is still what was signed. Hold on to that." I held on to it. I held on to it for 9 more days while I waited for my daughter to tell me what she had done. She never told me. The fax came on a Tuesday morning. Daniel's secretary called me before he did. She said, "Mrs. Holloway, you should come in." She did not say why. She did not have to. When I walked into his office, the petition was on his desk. 3 pages. Davidson County Circuit Court. Stephanie Holloway Whitfield, petitioner. Grant Whitfield, respondent. Grounds: fraud, based on undisclosed premarital debt. Filing date: 31 days after the wedding. I read it twice. Then I read the date again, because the date was the part that broke something in me. 31 days. She had sat across from me at Sunday dinner the week before. She had asked me to pass the rolls. She had eaten dessert. She had hugged me at the door and said, "Love you, Mom." And the entire time, the petition had already been filed. I did not stop the music. I stopped the lie. That is the line I keep coming back to, because that is what the prenup did. It did not stop my daughter from making a quiet mistake. It stopped a quiet mistake from becoming a permanent theft. I went home that afternoon, and the envelope she had sent was waiting on my desk. I had not opened it. I knew what was inside. I sat down, and I opened it anyway, because I owed the moment that much. The ring was inside, taped inside a folded piece of tissue paper. There was no note. The envelope was addressed to Grant, not to me. She had sent it to my house because she did not have the strength to send it to his. I held the ring in my open palm for a long time. I put it on the desk next to the prenup. I did not say anything. Some moments do not deserve speech. That was the second scene with the ring. The ring on top of the document. 2 pieces of paper underneath a piece of metal. The metal was small. The document was small. But the document was the one that mattered. Greed gets loud when paperwork gets quiet. I want you to hold on to that, because Grant's response made it true. Grant retained an attorney within 4 days of being served. His attorney was a man named Lawrence Beale. I had never heard of him. He had a downtown office and a courtroom voice, and a habit, I would later learn, of building his argument around feelings instead of pages. Beale filed a response on Grant's behalf. The response argued that the annulment was not a voluntary filing in the spirit of the prenup clause. He argued that the term voluntary implied a mutual or negotiated dissolution, and that Stephanie's filing, done in secret, done unilaterally, done without notice to her own family, was something else. He argued that Grant had entered the marriage in good faith, and that the marriage had legally existed, and that the existence of the marriage itself meant the joint property should transfer. His proof of the marriage's existence, in the body of the filing, was the ring. He referred to it 3 separate times. He called it a physical manifestation of intent. He called it a real, intended, and consummated symbol of union. He attached a photograph of it to the response, taken from the wedding album that I had paid the photographer $15,000 to produce. I will tell you something. I have lived a long time. I have read a lot of legal filings. I have never read one that tried to use a ring against a notarized clause. Beale was smart enough to know what he was doing. He was trying to move the case out of the document and into the emotion because he knew the document was going to lose him the property. That was the third scene with the ring. The ring inside a filing, photographed and labeled, used as evidence that the marriage was real, as if the prenup did not already concede that, as if the clause had ever been about whether the marriage existed. The clause was about what happened to title if the marriage ended a certain way within a certain window. The ring was irrelevant. But Beale knew the judge would have to read about it. Daniel and I sat in his office the night before the hearing. He had the prenup laid out across the table. He had highlighted 3 lines in yellow. He read them out loud to me. He said, "In the event of any filing for annulment, dissolution, or declaration of voidance of this marriage within 90 calendar days of the date of execution, all jointly titled real property, commercial holdings, and beneficial interests shall revert to the premarital owner of record, without set-off, equitable division, or compensatory transfer." I asked him if he was nervous. He said, "Margaret, the clause is clean. The notary is clean. The signatures are clean. The filing date is on a court stamp. They cannot unstamp a court stamp." I asked him if Stephanie would be at the hearing. He said yes. I asked him if she had asked about me. He said, "She has not asked about anything, Margaret. Her attorney has been doing all the talking." That answer hurt more than the facts had hurt. The facts was paper. The silence was my daughter. The night before the hearing, I sat in my husband's old study. I kept his desk exactly the way he left it. The bottom drawer still had the notarized instruction he had written before he died. I did not take it out. I just put my hand on the wood of the drawer and I said his name out loud. I said, "Henry." She filed it on day 31. The clause held. I do not believe in talking to the dead in the way some people do, but I believe in being honest with them. The dead deserve honesty. The hearing was on a Thursday. The courtroom in Davidson County is smaller than people imagine from television. There is dark wood, and there is a flag, and there is a long bench, and there is a judge who has seen a lot of paperwork and is not impressed by speeches. His name was Judge Harlan Brewer. He had been on the bench for 19 years. Stephanie was there. She sat at the petitioner's table next to her private attorney, a woman I did not recognize. Stephanie did not look at me when I walked in. She looked at the floor, then at her hands, then at the empty space in front of her. She had cut her hair. It was shorter than I had ever seen it. She looked thin. She looked like a person who had not slept in a long time. Mothers notice these things even when they are angry, especially when they are angry. Grant was at the respondent's table. Beale sat beside him with a thick binder and a confident jaw. Grant looked the way men look when they have been told they are about to win something. He had a small smile that he kept trying to hide. Daniel sat next to me. He did not have a binder. He had one folder. Inside the folder were 3 pages of prenup and 1 page of notary record. He set the folder on the table and he folded his hands on top of it. That was his entire courtroom presence. That is all the document needed. Beale went first. He stood up and he talked for 19 minutes. I timed him on Daniel's pocket watch because Daniel had given it to me to hold during the hearing. The watch had belonged to his own father. He told me to squeeze it whenever I felt like saying something I should not say. I squeezed it twice. Once, when Beale called the ring the truest evidence of marital intent in this entire record. And once when he said the words, "Mrs. Holloway's clause should be read as aspirational rather than operative." That was the line that almost made me stand up. Aspirational. As if a notarized agreement signed in the presence of two witnesses was a wish. As if my husband's instruction in the bottom drawer of his desk was a wish. As if the building on West End Avenue was a wish. I squeezed the watch. I did not stand up. Daniel went second. He stood up. He held the folder. He said, "Your Honor, with respect to opposing counsel, the clause is not aspirational. It is executed. It is notarized. It is dated. The annulment was filed 31 days after the date of execution. The clause is a self-executing reversionary provision. The court does not need to interpret intent. The court needs only to read the page." He set the folder on the bench. He sat down. He had spoken for less than a minute. The judge took the folder. He opened it. He read the prenup. He turned to the second page. He turned to the third page. He looked at the notary stamp. He looked at the date of the annulment filing. He looked at the date of the wedding. He did the math on a piece of paper. I could see him doing it. He wrote the number 31 on his pad, and he circled it. Then he did something I will not forget. He looked up at Grant, not at Beale, at Grant. He said, "Mr. Whitfield, have you read this document?" Grant blinked. He looked at Beale. Beale opened his mouth, and the judge said, "I am asking your client, counselor." Grant said, "I read it before the wedding, Your Honor." The judge said, "Did you read it carefully?" Grant said, "I read the parts my attorney advised me to read." The judge said, "Which attorney?" Grant said, "The attorney I had at the time." The judge said, "And who was that?" There was a small pause. Beale answered for him. He said, "Your Honor, Mr. Whitfield did not retain independent counsel for the execution of the prenuptial agreement." The room went quiet. That quiet had weight to it. That quiet was the kind of silence that exists before a ruling. The kind of silence where everyone in the room understands what is about to happen, except the one person who needs to understand it the most. That was the silence I had been waiting for. The judge looked back at the page. He read the clause one more time. He looked up. He said, "The clause is unambiguous. The filing occurred within the 90-day window. The petitioner availed herself of the court's jurisdiction by filing for annulment. The clause is self-executing. All jointly titled property, including the commercial holding identified in Schedule A, reverts to the premarital owner of record. The court so orders." He brought the gavel down. It was not loud. Real gavels are not loud. It was a single, dry knock. The building on West End went back to the Holloway Trust. The other jointly titled assets followed. $3,800,000 in commercial real estate snapped back to the name it had been under for 31 years. Daniel did not smile. He just closed the folder. He had known what was going to happen since the morning the fax came in. He had only been waiting for the room to catch up. Grant did not move at first. He sat very still. Then he turned to Beale and he said, in a voice loud enough for me to hear 2 rows back, "What about the other stuff?" Beale did not answer. Grant said it again. "What about the other stuff?" The other stuff was the second part of the clause, the part Grant had not read carefully enough. You see, the prenup had 2 reversionary provisions. The first one returned the commercial property. Everyone in the room understood that one. The second one returned every gift that had been made to Grant by the Holloway family in contemplation of the marriage. The car, the watch, the down payment on the house in Belmead, even the wedding band Stephanie had given him at the altar. Every item that had been transferred from the Holloway side to Grant inside the 90-day window was treated as a conditional gift, voidable upon annulment. That was the fourth scene with the ring. The judge's clerk read the schedule of conditional gifts out loud. She got to item 6. She read, 1 platinum men's wedding band, valued at $14,000, transferred from the Holloway estate to the respondent on the date of the marriage ceremony. She paused. She read the next line. Returnable to the estate upon dissolution within 90 days. Grant looked down at his own hand. He had still been wearing the ring. He had not taken it off. I think until that moment, he had believed he was going to walk out of the courtroom with the building and the ring and a story about how he had been wronged. He looked at the judge. He looked at Beale. He looked at his own finger. Then, very slowly, he slid the ring off and he set it on the table in front of him. He did not look up while he did it. That was the moment the room understood the whole shape of the thing. The prenup had not been written to humiliate anyone. It had been written to protect what my husband had built. The ring on the table was not a victory. It was a piece of evidence going back to where it belonged. Stephanie was crying by then, quietly. She had not made a single sound the entire hearing, but her shoulders were shaking. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. I wanted to walk over to her. I did not. Some moments are not yours to fix. Some moments belong to the document. The judge rose. The clerk gathered the folders. Daniel stood up and offered me his arm. We walked out of the courtroom together. I did not look back at Grant. I did not look back at Stephanie either. Not because I did not love her, because I did. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Daniel handed me back the pocket watch. He said, "Margaret, your husband would be proud of you today." I said, "He would be proud of the claws." He said, "Same thing." We did not say anything else for a while. The wind moved through the courthouse columns. A taxi pulled up at the curb and let someone else out for someone else's hearing. The world kept moving the way it always does after the gavel comes down. I went home. I sat at my husband's desk. I opened the bottom drawer. I took out the notarized instruction. I read his handwriting again. Protect what we built, especially from the people who smile while they sign. I put the instruction back. I closed the drawer. Then I did something I had not been able to do for a month. I called my daughter. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was small. She said, "Mom." I said, "Are you eating?" There was a long silence. Then she said, "Not really." I said, "Come for Sunday lunch." She said, "I do not deserve to." I said, "Stephanie, that is not what Sunday lunch is for." She came that Sunday. She did not say much. I did not ask her anything about Grant. I did not ask her anything about the private attorney. I did not ask her why she had not told me. I made roast chicken and the rolls she likes. I set the table for 2. She sat in the chair she had always sat in. She ate slowly. At one point, she looked across the table at me and she said, "Mom, why did you put the 90-day clause in?" I told her the truth. I said, "Because I did not want a stranger to own anything your father had built, not for 1 day longer than the law required." She nodded. She did not cry. She had cried in the courtroom. There was no crying left. Then she said, "Did you know, before the facts came? Did you know I was going to file?" I said, "No. I knew something was wrong. I did not know what." She said, "I should have told you." I said, "Yes, you should have." That was the whole conversation. We did not have a big repair scene. Real families do not have big repair scenes. Real families have Sunday lunch and roast chicken and the slow work of one meal at a time. She started coming back to Sunday lunch every week after that. Sometimes she stayed for an hour. Sometimes she stayed for 4. We did not talk about Grant. We did not talk about Beale. We did not talk about the ring. The ring lives in a small velvet box in the bottom drawer of my husband's desk now, next to the notarized instruction. I did not put it on a chain. I did not throw it in a river. I did not sell it. The trust returned it as conditional property, and conditional property has a place. Its place is in the drawer. I want to tell you what I learned from this. Not the legal part, the other part. The legal part is simple. A notarized clause is stronger than a feeling. A notarized clause is stronger than a ring. A notarized clause is stronger than a courtroom speech about intent. If you have property you want to protect, write it down. Get it witnessed. Get it stamped. Pay the lawyer. Pay the notary. Pay attention. The other part is harder. The other part is that my daughter married a man who asked about a building before he asked about a life. She knew, on some quiet floor of herself, that she had made a mistake. She knew it on the honeymoon. She knew it the first Sunday she did not come to lunch. She knew it the second Sunday. She knew it the third. She just did not have a way to tell me, because she was ashamed of the wedding I had paid for, and she did not want me to feel like the money had been wasted. The money was not wasted. The money bought a ceremony. The ceremony was real. The marriage was real. The annulment was real. The clause was real. And the clause did what it was written to do. The clause did not punish my daughter. It returned the building to the only name that should ever have been on the deed. It returned a ring to a drawer. It returned my Sunday table to 4 chairs, and then, eventually, to 2. Grant did not get the property. He did not get the ring. He did not get the down payment on the house in Belmead. He did get a hard education in reading documents carefully. I do not feel triumphant about that. I do not feel anything about Grant at all anymore. He was a stranger who smiled while he signed. My husband had warned me about exactly that kind of man, in his own handwriting, in the bottom of a drawer, 12 years before Grant ever stepped into our lives. The will did not create the truth. It preserved it. There is one last thing I want to tell you, and then I will let you go. A few weeks after the hearing, Daniel sent me a copy of the final court order in a sealed envelope. He sent it the old-fashioned way, by certified mail. I signed for it on the porch. I brought it inside. I sat down at my husband's desk. I did not open it for 2 days. When I finally did, the order was 3 pages. It listed every piece of property. It listed every gift. It listed the ring. At the bottom of the 3rd page, under the judge's signature, there was one extra line that the clerk had typed in. It said, "Premarital title restored in full." I read that line out loud. I read it to the empty room. I read it to the drawer. I read it to my husband, wherever he is. And then I closed the envelope, and I put it next to the notarized instruction, and I closed the drawer. The drawer is not empty. The drawer is the loudest part of the whole house. If you have ever watched someone in your family make a major legal decision in secret, a decision about property, about money, about a future you helped build, and you only learned about it when the paperwork arrived, you already know what that drawer feels like. You already know why the clause mattered. You already know why the document had to be written before anyone needed it. Write it down. While you still can. While the people you love are still the people you love. While the building still has the right name on the deed. Pay the attorney. Pay the notary. Sit in the chair. sign the page. Let the document do the work later, when nobody has the strength to speak. And if stories like this remind you that final wishes deserve respect, subscribe to my channel for more stories. Because sometimes the person who is gone still leaves the strongest voice in the room. My husband's voice is in the bottom drawer of his desk. It is on a notarized page. It is in one sentence written in his own hand. And on a Thursday, in a Davidson County courtroom, 12 years after he wrote it, that sentence held a $3,800,000 building in place and returned a small platinum ring to the only family it should ever have belonged to. The envelope had been sealed longer than their patience lasted. The clause had been written longer than the marriage had lived. And the drawer is still closed, but the document inside it is still speaking.